You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hey, and welcome to a very special episode. We are starting a brand new show here on the network, and is a part of the 602 Club feed. We're really excited to be doing this for you. We are going to be diving into the extended universe of Indiana Jones, starting with the Indiana Jones Chronicles, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and I'm really glad to have with me a man who knows way more about this than I could ever learn in a lifetime, none other than Yancy Evans. Yancy, this is going to be, I think, just a rip-roaring adventure of a good time, honestly.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Matt. I'm really happy to be talking about this show. The funny thing is, the show is now starting to get a lot of love in the geek community as people are discovering it. Either for a while it was streaming on Paramount Plus, then it was on Disney, and you can as movies. But we're going to be going through kind of both the movies and the TV show chronologically, which is going to be a lot of cool. But a lot of people rediscovering this. It's really kind of a gem of a show, and it's just there's so many bits of groundwork that George Lucas built.
Yeah.
For the prequels and for other stuff. We'll get into all that later,
yeah.
But I'm looking so forward to this. This show has a very special place in my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the reason that this kind of came about is that we were talking about this thought process of maybe doing a bonus show, and what could we do then? And we started talking about this show specifically, and it's something that I've never seen. I've seen bits and pieces of it here and there, but I've never actually seen the whole show. And so I'm really looking forward to diving into this with you. But I think, Yancy, one of the most interesting things about the show itself is just the reason for its existence. And, one of the biggest things that Lucas wanted to do with this is that, people kept asking him, especially Steven, even Harrison, they would ask him questions about, what was Indiana like as a kid, and what were his experiences like? What were the things that helped make him who he is? And so Lucas would tell them, his thought process on those type of things as they were shooting, especially I think the third movie is really where they started having a lot of these conversations, because we actually played with Indiana Jones past. And so Lucas decided, well, I could do this show and give everybody the backstory, the prequel, if you will, for everybody's favorite adventurer. And at the same time, I could utilize that to do something that he is very passionate about, which is helping kids understand history better and introducing them to historical characters that they may or may not learn about in school, but to have kind of a almost personal experience, right, with that character through them meeting our favorite adventurer, Indiana Jones, and of course then the impact that they would have on him as a character. And I think, that's such a beautiful idea that Lucas's whole goal here, like Star Wars, it had a goal of wanting to kind of bring a morality tale to kids, because he felt like that had been lost. And here, the love of history, he seems to feel is being lost, and so he wants to do something about that.
Yeah, so in the late 80s, George got involved. He had a group he called Edutopia, which was to design software for schools to, kind of, he saw a future where education was going to be more on screens and, consuming information, via short subject type films, stuff like that. And he really saw this as a vehicle to expose kids to, one of the big things he talked about this in one of the promos for the film. He really hated how history was being taught, which is basically dates. Here, you need to know this date and this date. And when his view is you teach history through introducing characters. So the goal was always each episode, Indy would meet an interesting historical figure from somewhere in the world's past. And he would have this adventure. And some of them aren't even adventures. They're just experiences that he has as a child or a young adult. And that's how he thought this would be a good way to introduce kids to history, especially turn of the century history at the time, because a lot of that is kind of lost. Kids don't really, you kind of jump from the Civil War to World War I or World War II, and all this time in between is kind of lost, which a lot of it is some of the most influential history that impacted the latter half of the 20th century. So that was his goal with this show. And it also became, I think, as the show evolved, he realized it was also going to be a test bed for what he's wanting to do later on down the road, which is to test technology and see what it could do, as far as for editing purposes, for visual effects, because, he had these Star Wars prequels sitting in his back pocket, and he needed to develop the technology and the technicians who could utilize the technology to help these stories come to life. So that's kind of how this whole ball got rolled.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I am in that same boat, I think, as George, where I love history. I think it's incredibly important. It's salient to our lives because, understanding how we got to where we are, even just thinking about the idea of the way we think, and how that influences and grows, and what are the things that get us to a place to thinking one thing instead of another. The important movements of history and the people who have inspired those great movements or terrible movements, incredibly important. And that's the thing that this show is really going to do. I mean, even within this first episode, where we have two parts to it, we've got the younger Indy part and the teenage Indy part. Once we get to the teenage Indy part, there's such a movement there to show the ambiguity that can happen in how we understand history, and how we could get swept up in a moment of history, and maybe how it's actually best if we're able to kind of think systematically about it. And there's just something really interesting about this. So I also think, as we attack this show, you mentioned something, is that, the show has existed. It had a broadcast order. And now if you are to purchase it, either through streaming or if you get the DVD sets, it's actually presented in this movie format where each episode is basically a 2-hour movie. And yet that's not the way it was originally presented on television. And so what is the reason for, the change that we get where Lucas goes in and kind of re-edits this and creates a new version?
Well, I think a couple of things motivated that down the road. Is so they shot over, I think it was basically 6 months, primarily, for most of the episodes that take place in seasons 1 and 2. And what happened was, but they also shot a couple of specifically 2-hour event type movies. There's one specifically called Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Blues. And there's Indiana Jones and the Phantom Train of Doom. Those were both conceived as 2-hour event type movies. And so I think what began to happen, and you'll even see when we go through the broadcast order later on in season 2, the old Indy bookends kind of go away and they just start the story proper. And eventually what ended up happening is ABC decided to cancel the show. It was just, they had a great time slot for it, but like ABC used to do back in the day, they always kept monkeying around with time slots to find a good time slot to move their prized possession to. And then what ended up happening is the great time slot that Indiana Jones was in and was getting really solid ratings, they moved it to a different time slot and the ratings kind of stayed the same. But then it started to get preempted by sports. And then the ratings just took a dive and ABC said, yeah, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
But what happened, luckily, is the show got picked up by the Family Channel, which is now known as Freeform. And there were still episodes. There's like 4 episodes they still had in the can that ABC never aired. So they started with those. And they had other episodes that they were pretty much done shooting with. And so the Family Channel approached them and said, hey, why don't we finish these as movies? And George Lucas said, okay, let's do that. And so they went back, reshot. And I think it was at that point that George realized, okay, for marketing purposes, and you also have to realize the time frame this is all happening in, the mid-90s, VHS is starting to go on the way out, and we're starting to see the advent of DVD. And so putting an entire series on VHS was no longer kind of a thing. The only series I can even think of at the time that were really doing that anymore were all the different Trek series. We're still
I remember that.
Putting out VHS tapes. But most others were kind of moving away from that model. But it was still too early for DVD. So I think this was the solution, because the movies, the re-edited films, which dropped the old Indy bookends and kind of shot some footage to kind of link episodes together, because the show was shot obviously not chronologically.
Right.
It was shot was shot wherever they were on location. They shot those episodes. So they were able to produce a smaller set of movies that they could put on VHS, and they didn't even get out all the movies, but they eventually started airing on the Family Channel, and then actually get too terribly long-winded. Then the History Channel picked it up, and that's where this idea of, if you pick up the DVD set, which I highly recommend to anybody, they've got these fantastic documentaries on there.
Yeah, they're great. I picked them up. I'm glad I did, one, because I'll have the full episodes like this. And in all honesty, if you have a 4K television and a good 4K player, the presentation of the episodes actually looks pretty stellar. Yeah. It's amazing.
It does. Yeah. And so what happened when the History Channel started airing the show, they started introducing it with a historian who would talk about the history surrounding the particular episode. And it became kind of this event thing. And so I think George had in his mind, hey, you know what? We could do this, help schools out. Because they really, when the DVDs eventually came out, they really pushed that as hey, we can get these into schools, and you can watch the movie, then watch the documentary that goes with the movie, kind of thing. So that's kind of how we got where we are. We're gonna try to watch it chronologically. I know it's gonna be kind of a interesting kind of dynamic, but we'll make it work.
Yeah, I mean, so we decided that we are going to watch it in the order that we were given it on broadcast, and that way, we can have that experience, of course, with as you mentioned, in most of the episodes, not all of them. I think there are 2 or 3 episodes where you actually don't have the older Indy bookends. And those were used as framing devices to kind of help introduce the story you get. And in fact, of course, in this first episode, it is very clearly the linchpin of how these 2 stories connected from the younger life to the older life, because, he's telling the story to these kids, and then they want to know the rest of the story about how this guy got caught. And so he finally tells them the rest of the story, and that jumps ahead in the timeline of his life. And so, we're gonna be making sure that we watch the episodes so that we are able to see those young Indy bookends. At some point, there might be a place where we go back and possibly watch the movies themselves and the way they're presented there. But I mean, we're gonna get to all of that material just in the broadcast order. And so, and then the other thing we're going to do, Yancy, is we decided that it would be pretty fun because there's 26 episodes, right, of the show. So that's not a lot of bonus material, but we decided, well, while we're at it, why don't we also talk about all of the Bantam novels that came out, and
you betcha.
Good, bad, or ugly. I've actually never read one of the Indiana Jones novels. I've read the novelizations that came out, but I've never read the novels. And then we'll probably wrap up by just talking through the Indiana Jones series and kind of seeing how any of this material has any impact then on the thing that people know Indiana Jones the most for, which is the films. So,
well, the one thing I wanted to say, the one thing I love about the show so much is, and George talks about this, is how there's a specific reason he divided the show up into younger Indy and older Indy, older young Indy. And he saw in boys very much this demarcation point at which there's kind of this age where your mind is enlightened and you're exposed to new ideas and things, and you start acquiring information. And that's kind of the story. More of the stories around the younger Indy are less adventure oriented and more intellectual, like expanding his horizons, having his first kind of flirtations with a girl, that kind of thing. And they're cute. But then when we get to older younger Indy, it's the recognition of now you're being exposed to things on the emotional level, on how you're going to interact with the world going forward with the information that kind of informed you in the past, how you're going to bring that to the world and how you're going to interact with those things. And it's really fascinating when you watch the show in that light.
Well, and I think that one of the most interesting parts of this is that the premiere episode, as it was originally aired, which was Young Indiana Jones and the Curse of the Jackal, which gives us a representation of young Indy as he sets out on these world adventures for the first time with his parents, and then sets up that moment right before he's about to go to high school, and sets him on a course of an adventure as well. And I think the desire of Lucas to show both parts of Indy's life, as there are all these things that he's learning as a child, and as he grows up, he is then doing the same thing that we all have to do as we grow up, which is to take what it is that we've learned from our parents and school and all those things, and we start to kind of test those, right? And see which ones play out in our lives. And so, as we dive into the episode, and the beginning of Indy's life as he moves away from Princeton, New Jersey, with his parents, and he's going to go on this 2-year adventure where they're going to travel the world. His dad's going to be teaching, and so they're going to visit all these places. And the first place they go is to Egypt. And I thought that this was kind of fascinating because the way that it's done, there are so many places where Indiana will say something to someone about a belief that he has that you can tell he's been raised with, but he hasn't really thought anything about. And then somebody will say something back to him that challenges that preconception. And one of the biggest places we see that is obviously with T.E. Lawrence, as he, challenges the preconception of the idea of, all good people die and go to heaven. Right? That's just what happens. And so that was a really interesting way to kind of begin this series, where that's one of those formative questions, right? What do you believe about humanity? What do you believe about what happens after death? And how do you figure out what you believe to be true about that and what is true about that?
Yeah, what I love is it really is a continuation of the life lessons that George was imparting with Star Wars. it's the same questions. Like, what do you believe? Why do you believe what you believe? Do you, and how's that going to carry you forward in your life? And I loved the fact Indy kind of comes at it with a, probably very kind of Christianized America, but probably not churched at all.
Exactly.
View of, well, hey, all good people go to heaven. And T. Lawrence pushes back with the Islamic view of things, and tries to help him expose him to some other concepts that are out there, and to broaden his thinking of things. Because the one thing that's really interesting is, he's off with his tutor, and she's obviously going completely, book learning, and Lawrence is helping him to get beyond just books and look at, the wider world around him. And I just, that's the one thing I love about Lucas so much, and the things he gets involved in. He's always looking at those broader pictures. It's not so narrowly focused. And I think sometimes people kind of get lost in that. Sometimes you can lose an audience with that, but it's good stuff. It's good, deep, heady stuff.
I think one of the beauties of the way in which T.E. Lawrence does challenge him is that, what it is just exposing him to the idea that there are other ideas. And so to just readily accept what you've been told and assume that it's true is not something that we as humans should generally do. We should be a people, right, that look at what is told to us and then weigh it against all of the available information, right? And the whole idea, I think, of what Lawrence seems to be trying to teach Indiana Jones is this idea of a well-examined life, not living a well-examined life, never thinking intentionally about the things that we do think and why we think them and why we believe them to be true. If we're people that never actually do that, that's not the type of life that we should have. And so what's kind of beautiful is, again, Lawrence isn't saying that the Muslim view of life or the Hindu view of life or any of these other views of life are right or wrong or any of those things. He's just saying, hey, there are other thought processes out there, and therefore we should probably think about those before we just readily accept something, which I think is really wise, right? That's actually an incredibly salient point for anyone to learn, especially at that formative age of about 9.
And in particular, in that scene, what's so great is there's some tension that he's having with his former teacher and Indy's current teacher, Miss Seymour, because she's very much coming from, she's got her set views on things, which she's obviously gone through that and examined that aspect of life. And so that's her lane, but she's also very bookish and very much, I'm trying to inform him out of these books.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going somewhere I don't need him to go right now. So there is a little bit of interesting tension in the scene where she kind of calls him out, but he pushes back. And that's one of the things, there's a lot. The thing that people don't realize is the amount of quality writers on this show. Like, the script for this episode was co-written by Lucas and Jonathan Hale, who had gone on and done a lot of Hollywood films. One of the main writers in the writer's room was Frank Darabont, of all people, who went on to have a huge career as one of Hollywood's biggest screenwriters, in the 90s and early 2000s, and was a director as well. So he's got really smart people writing this stuff, and it's just a joy to watch. For me, It was at least a joy to rewatch some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and the beauty of that too is, and you rightly mentioned this, is that the answer that Indy gives is one that has not been examined. It is just something he's parroting, and when he says it, has nothing to do with any true representation of Christianity, which would be, just all good people go to heaven. Like, that's not so. that's the beauty, I think, of the show about that. And just that episode, though, specifically, I wanted to kind of ask you, because really it turns into this idea of there being this mystery with this mummy, and kind of very classic, of course, meeting T.E. Lawrence, and who would go on to be known as Lawrence of Arabia. And how do you feel like this episode does of kind of thrusting us into this world and being really the first thing that anybody would see? Does it hold up for you as your entry point?
Well, yeah. So I very much, I grew up on a lot of 50s era Disney Hollywood historical pieces like Johnny Tremaine and other things like that. And I think it was really drawing off of a lot of those kind of films where, hey kids, I'm going to present to you some history and some interesting characters and just go with this. Now I know there was a lot of pushback from fans because they were just expecting wall to wall, Joaquin Phoenix, or not Joaquin Phoenix, River Phoenix, right, kind of action adventure from the opening of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And this show doesn't really do that a lot. But I think it's a fantastic fun, and it's got all the classic elements, the really spooky, sarcophagus and the underground tomb that they're going into, and then you've got the mystery of who's trying to break into this tomb and what happened to the Jackal headpiece. And I think on that level it works incredibly well. It's fun. It's a good family adventure. I think it works in very well. I just gotta say the casting in this show is just amazing. That's one thing I got to point out, that Lucas really nailed it out of the park. The actor, Lloyd Owen, who plays Henry Jones Sr. Yeah. He embodies that role so well. He's like channeling Connery, but he's not just doing an imitation of Connery. He's doing his own thing. And Anna Jones as I think her name, Ruth DeSouza, I think her name is. She plays Indy's mother. She's just a top-notch cast all around. And that's the thing that helps hold the show together. Is just a wonderful cast. And oh, by the way, if you're a total Indiana Jones nerd, we have what's his face? Robert Tabin, I think is his name. He played two of the villainous characters in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He was the Arab with the monkey, and he was Barranca at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, who tries to shoot Andy in the back. He plays the villain who steals the Jackal head. So that's a lot of fun.
I think this is a good episode, and I think that it does do a good job of kind of introducing us to the character, to the idea of the show, and it's the fact that we're filming in Egypt and all of that stuff is incredibly amazing. It's a really well done visual episode in that sense. They put a lot of work into this show. They filmed all over the world for this show. They were not just filming in your backyard kind of thing. They were filming everywhere. And so I like it. And like you said, I think the cast is really good. I think the beauty of this entry with the youngest version of Indiana Jones that we see in the show fits him as where he is age-wise, right? It kind of starts showing where he would get some of his, detective abilities and that kind of stuff, learning about what it means to be on an archaeological dig and all that kind of thing. So I think all of that was really well done. But, to me, I think the real high watermark for this as an opener was the way in which we, through the connection point with old Indy, we go to Mexico and we find, an Indiana Jones who is bored and looking for action. And that is a double entendre because that's what he's looking for. And
exactly.
Yet finds himself smack dab in the middle of this border war that's happening at that point in the United States in 1916 between General Pershing and Pancho Villa. And that whole unrest in Mexico and how it's kind of spilling over into the United States. And I think what it does, and maybe the best thing that this episode really does as a whole, was that it presents an incredibly well thought out, very balanced look at what it means to kind of be on all sides of a conflict, and to see that conflict's impact then as well on those that are on the periphery of it. And that is incredibly fascinating. And I think it really just goes to show the way in which that we were going to try and handle history in as balanced a way as possible.
Yeah. So the one thing in particular, the second half of the episode, which primarily takes place in Mexico, what I love about it is how it actually, not just because of the Jackal part of the story, but it actually ties into the lessons that Lawrence is imparting on him, which is you have to look at a broader spectrum of what is going on in the world around you.
Yes.
Because what ends up happening is this bored young man hears Pancho Villa give an impassioned speech about revolution and how we're fighting against the oppressors who are keeping down the working class. And that all sounds good to an impressionable young man. And he suddenly finds himself thrust in this revolution because he believes in the revolution. But then when he's presented later in the episode with the realities of the revolution, and to your point, how it's affecting the peripheries, and there's a wonderful scene where he runs into the old man, and the Pancho Villa's men are stealing a bunch of his chickens, and he's like, "No, these are my last chickens. Please don't take these chickens." And Indy's trying to use Pancho Villa's own words to explain the justification to taking the chickens. And then the old man explains that, look, I've gone through multiple revolutions and everybody promises me chickens. And at the end of the day, all they end up doing is stealing my chickens.
Right.
It does. And that was the beauty of that, because that moment kind of tied into what Lawrence was saying in the first half of the episode, which is when he's exposed to, oh my gosh, there's this broader picture to what's going on. Now, the problem is he's still this bored young man who doesn't know what he wants to do with his life, which then leads him to the other half of it, which is he gets a letter from Lawrence talking about, I will jump to the end, but the letter from Lawrence, because it all segues, the letter from Lawrence talking about the necessity for Europe to defend itself against the aggression of Germany, and that this is his war and his time. And Indy then becomes convinced that this is his war and that he needs to go off and he's going to join his friend Remy, who's a Belgian, who was in Pancho Villa's camp, and they're going to run off to Europe and go fight in World War I. So it's again a wonderful examination of young men and just the impetuousness of young men at that age, that they can be so easily swayed by circumstances, events, words, and we'll see later on as the show evolves how all those decisions affect them.
Well, and I think what's kind of interesting about that is what you just said, right? There is something that drives so many young boys, which is the idea of wanting to be a hero and being a protector and all of those type of things, which, are a lot of the events that will play out in later Indy's life in the films, right? And so in a lot of this, I can almost sense how, when you get through World War One, with Indy being a big part of that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What's going to happen is you're going to get the jaded man who's just out for riches and glory in Temple of Doom. And so we're helping build that character. We're helping create that character so we can get to that point where we're truly going to understand as to why he is the way he is. And I think that's really beautiful. But like you said, Lawrence, and this was the beauty of having Lawrence as the first famous person that he meets that would later go on in history and have such an impact in history, right? That's what Lawrence did when it came to this idea of what should we do with what's happening in World War One with all of these Arab nations. How should we deal with them, and how should we deal with them specifically after the war, right? And because Lawrence has a clear understanding of these people because he's literally lived with them for such a long time, and his idea of how to draw lines and where to draw them and everything for nations is completely different than the arbitrary lines that get drawn later and what get us into so much trouble because we don't pay attention to him. This is exactly what he is trying to get Indiana Jones to understand, is that this is the way life is meant to be lived, which is that you dig in. You don't live an unexamined life, but you lived one that is examined, where you are soaking in information, and it kind of comes down to that whole thought process that we get with Spock in the Undiscovered Country, right? Knowledge is only the beginning of wisdom, and so that's kind of what he is trying to impart to Indiana Jones, and that's somewhat, I think, what Indiana Jones does learn once he runs into, like you said, that chicken farmer, where it's like, yeah, I've heard all that before. Words are great, but what actually happens is completely different. And what's actually kind of beautiful about that is that gets to the real history with Pancho Villa. When Pancho Villa is in power, his whole rhetoric was that he would give the land to the people. He never does when he has the opportunity to do so. And so there is a real lesson there to be learned, which is people can only really be judged by their actions, not their words. And I think it seems as though that is most likely going to be a lesson that's going to kind of permeate this series, right? It's not really about what you say, it's really about what you do. Right. And I think that is awesome. And so, yeah,
also, though, just to let everyone know, it's not just a bunch of talking heads. There are some, especially in the second half, of the pilot. There are some huge action set pieces. The thing that Lucas did that was so glorious with this show is he still did this on a reasonable budget. The episodes were about $2.5 million a pop, which is huge, obviously, for the time, and he's paying that. But what he did is in places where he needed to bigify the scale, as it were, he would literally rent, buy rights to use sections of movies that had bigger scale scenes that he could insert and stuff like in here. So like the big train at the end, there's some bits that are from another movie, but it's also interspersed with an actual train with their actual hundreds of extras. So it's one of those, it's like Hammond in Jurassic Park, we spared no expense. So
well, and like you said, that the action set pieces there are great. I mean, that whole train sequence, the blowing up of the wall there is really phenomenal, and I think they did just a great job. And like you said too, we got the whole moment where Indy is going to when he confronts Demetrius, right? And what does happen in that? We have him use a bullwhip, and it's very it feels very organic to the scene, and there's all these little nods to, you know, places we're going to go with the Indiana Jones series. And I think that's what kind of makes this an exciting thing. And I truly was really impressed with the quality of the episode, the quality of the production value. I mean, you know, and I think there's something about, you know, people don't really give Lucas the credit that he deserves when it comes to the work he's able to pull off on the budget that he's able to do it. And yet never sacrificing the quality. You know, even the places here where we do see some, you know, compositing work and stuff. I mean, it doesn't look cheesy. It doesn't look cheap. It does look like it's of the time, but that's to be expected. And so, you know, I think the beauty of George Lucas in this series is this is a place where, as always, he's literally willing to put his money where his mouth is. And I love that what drives him in this is this desire for kids to know history and to be excited by history, because history actually is really exciting because it illuminates the world we live in, and that's something we should be excited about. And I think this is a great start, man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and just quickly to your point on production value, pretty much everybody who worked on this production worked on the prequels. I mean, the director of photography is the same director of photography for the three for George's 3 episodes. Trisha Bigger is she does costumes. Most of the technicians on this production, they all once they graduated from Young Indiana Jones, they moved on to Radioland Murders, which was a test bed, you know, film for Lucasfilm, to make sure they were ready for all the kind of crazy digital work that was going to be required of episode 1. Yeah. And then they went whole hog into episode 1. And it's just wonderful because the one thing having this consistent crew from episode to episode is you'll see as we get deeper into the show, there's a consistency and quality everywhere. There's not this huge drop off from episode to episode. Everything, the budgets are there, the costumes are there, everything is awesome there on the screen. So, yeah.
Well, what would you rate? Do you think this opening episode? Where do you go with your ratings for this?
Oh man, that's a toughie, because I don't want to go super high because there's some great episodes coming up that are just like, those would be the pinnacle side things. But I really enjoy the Young Indiana Jones and the Curse of the Jackal. It's a fun adventure story. It's got great actors, great, terrific cast, terrific production. And let's not forget the score.
Oh, the score is great.
Theme by Elliot Rosenthal and Joel McNeely doing the music.
I agree.
Oh, just lights out. I'm gonna go high. I'm gonna go like 4.5. I'll go 4, just because I got to give myself some room for some episodes down the road that are coming.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna give this one 3.75 out of 5. And the reason that is because the first episode definitely isn't as strong as the second episode. And yet it's one of those things where it's truly necessary. It's kind of like the question, is The Godfather 2 better than The Godfather? Well, possibly, but you also need to see The Godfather to really appreciate The Godfather 2. So you can't really be upset about it. And so, no, I really do. I think this is a great start. I think it's one of those things where I would love to. I mean, when you look at this is the type of stuff Disney Plus should be doing, right? And yet can't seem to get their head around this type of quality television. And so I'm really excited to be taking this journey, Yancy, and I'm looking forward to it. But if people wanted to catch up with you and see what else is going on in your life, or maybe talk a little bit more about Young Indiana Jones, where would they find you?
Well, on X, you can find me at Galandro1. That's the character from Brian Daley Han Solo novels. That's kind of been my pseudonym for a couple of decades now on various boards and whatnot. But that's that. On Facebook, I'm under Yancy Evans, even though there are a couple of us. I'm the dorky looking one. And then I also have a blog I periodically update. Well, I haven't updated in a while, but I am going to get back to it. It's called WordPress.onesaga.com.
Nice.
So that's the best way to reach
That's great.
me.
Well, of course, people can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, here on the network, in the 602 Club, doing all the other episodes that we do. Plus, of course, all the great Star Trek talk that I do with Chris Jones. So check all of that out over the Nerd Party Network. You'll find me in a couple of shows. One is Owl Post, talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And then you'll find me over on Aggressive Negotiations with the great John Mills, talking about Star Wars each and every week. But we appreciate you joining us. And y'all come back now you're here.